The glass missed my face, but the words hit harder than any wound ever could. He shouted across the table that I had done nothing with my life, that every year beside him had been wasted. And in that moment, the laughter and clinking of silverware around me went silent. The shame pressed against my chest like a heavy stone. Yet somewhere deep inside I felt something stir. Not rage, not tears, but a quiet promise that one day he would see how wrong he was. Thank you so much for watching and for giving me a moment of your time. It means more than I can ever put into words. Before I continue, I would love to know where you are watching from, so please tell me in the comments because I always feel less alone when I hear from you. That night, after the glass shattered and the words cut through me, I sat in silence, holding myself together. I thought about the years I had given to that house, the meals cooked, the birthdays remembered, the endless nights of listening and supporting, and still he looked at me as if I was nothing. I wanted to scream, but instead I swallowed my pain and carried it deep inside, because I knew that if I opened my mouth right, then the words would come out broken. And I promised myself quietly that I would not let his voice be the last one to define who I was. I suppose I should tell you a little about myself, because behind that dinner table moment was a whole lifetime of choices, sacrifices, and quiet dreams that I kept folded away like old letters in a drawer. I am a woman who grew up with nothing more than a love for words, stories whispered to myself at night, poems scribbled in the corners of old notebooks, and pages filled when no one was watching. When I was younger, I thought maybe one day I could share those words with the world. But life had other plans for me. Marriage came, then children, and with them came the endless duties of running a home, making sure everyone else's needs were met before my own. I traded the pen in my hand for an apron, and the stories in my heart for silence, telling myself it was enough to see others grow, to see them thrive, to stand behind him as he chased his ambitions and dreams. For years I lived that way, quietly, faithfully, and without complaint. I raised our children, while he built his career. I kept the house together, managed the bills, and tried to keep peace where there was none. And all the while he reminded me that writing was nothing more than a hobby, something foolish, something unworthy of real attention. I remember once he found one of my old journals and he laughed as if it was a joke, saying I should stop wasting paper and time. And I smiled then, but inside it hurt, because every line I wrote carried pieces of me that no one ever bothered to see. Still, I kept on writing when I could, in the quiet moments after the dishes were done, late at night when the children were asleep. Little stories poured out of me even when I was exhausted, because it was the one thing that was truly mine. Looking back now, I see how much I gave up, how often I pushed my own voice aside so that his could fill the room, and how easy it was for him to forget that I too had dreams that mattered. And yet through it all, I never stopped believing, even if it was just a flicker, that someday my words would matter to someone, that they would not remain buried in notebooks gathering dust. But that moment at the dinner table, when the glass shattered and his words cut into me, that was the crack that broke the dam. All the years of silence came rushing forward, all the laughter I had swallowed, all the tears I had hidden. And though I said nothing that night, I felt something change inside of me, a shift, a spark, a reminder that the story of my life was not finished, not yet, and certainly not defined by the man who sat across from me. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone in the dim light of the kitchen, the shards of glass still glimmering on the floor, like little reminders of how easily a life can break. I could still hear his voice echoing in my head, cruel and sharp, telling me that I had done nothing. And I kept asking myself if that was really how he saw me after all these years, just a shadow, who cooked, cleaned, and obeyed. Nothing more. No dreams, no worth, no soul that reached beyond the walls of our home. And the weight of it pressed against my chest until I could hardly breathe. Yet as I sat there staring at that broken glass, I realized something important. I had lived most of my life, giving without measure, but I had not given to myself, not truly. And in that moment, a small seed of defiance began to grow. I walked quietly to my room and pulled out the old notebooks I had hidden away in the bottom of my drawer. Pages worn with time, words written in hurried scrawls between chores, ideas that had carried me through lonely nights, and I flipped through them with tears in my eyes, wondering why I ever let someone else convince me they were worthless. Every story carried memories. Every line carried my heart, and I knew deep down they were pieces of me, pieces that deserved to live, not to be mocked, not to be silenced. I could almost hear the younger version of myself whispering, urging me not to let those words die unspoken. And the more I turned the pages, the stronger that voice became. I did not sleep at all that night. Instead, I gathered every scrap of writing I could find, loose sheets tucked between recipe books, journals half filled, and the laptop where I had typed chapters in secret. And as the house lay in silence around me, I stared at that screen with trembling hands, knowing that this was my turning point. I could either keep burying myself in silence, or I could choose to breathe life into the words I had carried for so long. I told myself I was not doing it to prove him wrong. I was doing it to prove myself right, that the little spark I had never let go was worth something. And though my heart pounded and fear tried to stop me, I felt a strength that had been waiting for years finally rise to the surface. When morning came, I did not sit at the breakfast table. I did not pretend to be fine. I packed my laptop, a bag of clothes, and those notebooks, and without saying a word, I walked out the door. The cool air hit my face, and I breathed deeper than I had in years. I drove straight to a friend's house, one of the few people who had ever looked at me and seen more than a wife or a mother. She opened the door with worry in her eyes, but when she saw the determination in mine, she simply said, "Stay as long as you need," and it was in that small act of kindness that I felt my new life begin. Because for the first time in decades, I was no longer carrying my silence under his roof. I was carrying it into the world where it might finally be heard. At my friend's house, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The weight of his words still pressing down on me, but no longer trapping me inside those same four walls. She made me a cup of tea and sat quietly, not asking for details because she could see that I was holding too much inside. Instead, she gave me space. And in that silence, I opened my laptop and spread out my notebooks, the very pieces of myself that had been hidden away for decades. I traced my fingers over the worn covers and the faded ink, remembering the nights when I wrote just to survive the loneliness. The mornings when I scribbled lines before the children woke. The afternoons when I dreamed on paper while dinner simmered on the stove. And the more I looked at those pages, the more I realized that I had been building something all along, even when no one believed in me. I spent the next few days reading through my work, sometimes crying, sometimes smiling, because I could see my whole life reflected in those stories. Every sacrifice, every quiet act of love, every piece of myself that I thought had disappeared. And slowly I began to put them together, shaping them into something complete, something that could stand on its own. My hands shook as I typed, fear whispering that maybe he had been right all along, that maybe my words were nothing more than wasted time. But another voice inside of me, a stronger one, said no. These words are yours. They are your truth. And truth has weight. Truth has value. Truth deserves to be heard. On the fourth night, I finally did what I had been too afraid to do for years. I opened the websites of publishers, my heart racing as I read their guidelines, and with trembling fingers I prepared my manuscript, checking it over and over again, whispering small prayers into the stillness of my friend's home. Then I pressed send, not once but 5 times, to 5 different publishers. And as the emails disappeared into the unknown, I sat frozen, feeling as though I had leapt off a cliff, with no idea if there would be wings to catch me. Yet even in the fear I felt something I had not felt in so long. Hope. A fragile hope, but real enough to make me sit up straighter and breathe a little easier. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about what would happen if they never answered. If they laughed the way he did. If they tossed my words into a pile of rejects. But I also thought about what would happen if just one of them believed. If just one person saw what I had carried in silence for all those years. And as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I realized that no matter what came back to me, I had already taken back a part of myself. Because sending those stories out into the world was more than defiance. It was freedom. And I promised myself that whether the world accepted me or not, I would never again let anyone tell me that I had done nothing with my life. The days that followed were some of the longest of my life. Every morning I woke up at my friend's house with a mix of dread and hope sitting heavy on my chest. I would make myself a small breakfast and sit by the window with my laptop open, refreshing my email again and again. The silence of the inbox felt louder with each passing hour. And though I tried to distract myself by rereading my old notebooks or helping my friend with small chores, my mind always drifted back to that one thought. What if no one ever replied? What if he had been right? What if my life's quiet work really was nothing more than wasted paper? Still I held on, because deep inside I knew that silence from the world was easier to bear than silence inside my own soul. At night I would gather the courage to read through my stories again. Sometimes I would laugh softly at how young and hopeful my words once sounded. Other times I would cry over the pain and longing that spilled onto those pages. My friend would peek in on me and remind me gently that I was stronger than I believed. She told me more than once that I had been living in the shadows of someone else's voice for too long, and now it was time to let mine be heard. Those words gave me comfort, but the waiting still gnawed at me. I would hear the phone ring in the other room, and my heart would leap only to fall again. When it wasn't for me, the world seemed to be holding its breath, and I had no choice but to hold mine with it. On the 5th day, I almost convinced myself that nothing would come of it. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the ceiling, remembering the night of the broken glass, the sting of his words, and I thought about how easy it would be to pack my things, go back home, and slip once more into the silence he demanded of me. But something inside resisted. I had already taken a step I could not undo. I had sent my words out into the world. And even if no one answered, I was not the same woman I had been before. I was a woman who had dared. And there is power in daring, power that no insult could erase. Then, when I had nearly given up, it happened. The phone rang, and for a moment I didn't move, my hands frozen, my breath caught, as if time itself was testing whether I truly wanted this. When I finally answered and heard the voice on the other end, calm and professional, telling me they had read my manuscript and wanted to discuss publishing it, my knees almost gave out. I pressed the phone closer to my ear as if I could climb into the words themselves, and tears blurred my vision. I barely heard the details, the kind praise, the offer of an advance. All I could hear was the sound of someone finally seeing me, finally acknowledging what I had always known in my heart. That my words mattered, that I mattered, and in that moment I felt a piece of myself come alive again. A piece I thought I had lost forever. When I hung up the phone, my whole body trembled, not from fear this time, but from something I had not felt in years, a sense of being alive. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the phone to my chest, whispering to myself over and over that it was real. That someone out there had seen me, seen the part of me that had been buried under years of dismissal and silence. I cried quietly, not the broken sobs of defeat, but tears of release, of joy, of gratitude. Because in that one call, the story I had carried all my life was no longer just mine, it was ready to take its place in the world. The publisher had spoken of contracts, of edits, of an advance that would be sent once I signed, and the amount stunned me. It was not riches beyond measure, but it was enough to stand on my own if I chose to. Enough to remind me that my words carried value, real value, not the scraps of hobby nonsense he had always accused me of wasting time on. I thought about the years I had stood behind him, cooking his meals, supporting his career, clapping for his achievements, all while my own gifts were hidden in shadows. And now here I was, with an opportunity not just to step into the light, but to hold it in my own hands. I spent the next hours carefully reading through everything they had sent. My friend sitting beside me, smiling the whole time, encouraging me with every glance. When I signed my name at the bottom of that contract, my hand was steady, firmer than it had been in a long time. And as I slid the papers back into the envelope, I felt as though I had just claimed a piece of myself that had been waiting for decades. A piece that no broken glass or cruel word could ever take away again. That night, I allowed myself to dream in a way I had not dared to in years. I pictured my book on shelves. I imagined a stranger somewhere turning the pages, finding comfort or strength in my words. And I imagined walking past my husband in silence when that day came, knowing that he would finally see what I had always carried inside. Not through my anger, not through shouting, but through the undeniable truth that was written in black and white, words that could no longer be silenced. And as I drifted to sleep with a smile on my face, I knew that I had stepped onto a new path, one that belonged to me alone. When the papers were signed and the agreement was sealed, I carried a secret inside me that felt heavier than gold. A secret that made my steps lighter, even as the world around me stayed the same. I returned home after a week away with nothing but a small bag and my laptop. He barely looked at me when I walked in, muttering under his breath about how dramatic I had been. How I should have stayed and handled my duties like a proper wife. I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because for the first time in our long life together, I knew something he didn't. I knew that in a matter of months, the world would see me for who I really was. Not the silent woman at his side, but a voice that could no longer be pushed into the shadows. Every day, I kept my routine the same, cooking the meals, tidying the house, answering his short remarks with quiet patience. But at night when the house grew still, I would sit at the table and work on the edits the publisher requested, my heart swelling with every change, every polished line, every scene that finally shone the way I always wanted it to. He would pass by sometimes, shake his head, and say things like, "Wasting your time again." But I only smiled softly, because little did he know I was shaping the very thing that would outlast his insults. I was creating something that could not be undone. The weeks stretched on like this, me carrying two lives at once, the one he thought I was living, and the one I was truly building in silence. And I found strength in that hidden power, the quiet thrill of knowing that no matter how small he tried to make me feel, I was already larger than his words, already freer than his control. I began to notice that his voice no longer pierced me the way it used to. His cruelty no longer held me captive, because in my mind I held the image of my book being bound, printed, and placed in the hands of readers who would finally hear me. And each time I thought of it, my spirit grew steadier, my heart calmer, and my silence more powerful than any argument could ever be. There were moments when I almost slipped, moments when I wanted to throw the truth in his face and watch his arrogance crumble. But I stopped myself every time. Because I wanted the world to tell him what I had achieved, not me. I wanted him to discover it by accident, to walk into a store one day and see my name staring back at him from the cover of a book, and in that instant realize that the woman he had called useless, the woman he had dismissed, had created something eternal. So I kept my secret close, like a treasure, letting it nourish me in silence until the day came when silence would no longer be necessary. The nights of secret work turned into weeks, and as the manuscript grew stronger, my own spirit began to shift. I noticed it first in the way I carried myself, no longer shrinking when he raised his voice, no longer crumbling when he dismissed me. His words still came sharp and careless. He would say that I was wasting my hours, that a woman my age had nothing left to prove, but instead of cutting me, they rolled off like water because I knew what he did not. I knew that behind the walls of my silence, I was building a life he could not touch, a future that was already unfolding beyond his sight. There were moments when he would sit at the head of the table bragging about his work, about the people who respected him, about the things he had achieved, and I would sit quietly, not out of submission anymore, but out of certainty. Because as he boasted about his world, I was creating mine. I would think of the emails exchanged with editors, the excitement of seeing my words take their final shape, the promise of payment that was already on its way. Enough to secure my independence, enough to remind me that I was not bound to the life he thought he controlled. I could feel freedom whispering at the edges of my days, and it gave me a calm he could not understand. Sometimes at night when he was asleep, I would take out the early proof pages they sent me, holding them close, running my hands over the printed words, seeing my name in bold at the top, and every time I did, I felt stronger, more alive. It was as though every sacrifice, every insult, every year of being overlooked had gathered together into something unbreakable, something he could never erase. And though he walked through the house certain that nothing had changed, I carried the truth inside me like a flame, steady and unstoppable. I did not tell him, not yet, because I wanted him to learn the truth from the world itself. I wanted the silence between us to become its own kind of justice. So I kept cooking his meals, folding his shirts, listening to his complaints, all while knowing that outside those walls my voice was already rising, already preparing to take its place. And in that quiet, I realized something I had never allowed myself to believe. That I was not invisible. That I had never been invisible. I had only been waiting for the right moment to step into the light. And that moment was closer than he would ever imagine. The day the first copy of my book arrived in the mail, I held it in my hands as if it were something sacred. The weight of it was unlike anything I had ever known, heavier than the glass he threw, heavier than the years of silence I had endured. Because within those pages lived my truth, my pain, my memories, and my strength. I ran my fingers across the cover where my name was printed, bold and undeniable. And for a long while I simply sat there staring, letting the tears roll down my cheeks as the reality sank in. I had done it, despite every insult, despite every dismissal, despite the endless nights of telling myself maybe it was foolish to believe. I had done it, and no one could take that from me. I opened the book slowly, the smell of fresh ink filling the air, and as I turned the pages I saw my words standing proud, no longer scribbled in secret notebooks, no longer hidden away in drawers, but polished, alive, and permanent. And at the front where the dedication sat, I read it aloud to myself, to those who tried to silence me. Thank you for the fire. I whispered the words again and again, because they were not written out of spite. They were written out of survival. They were a reminder that even in the darkest moments, something inside me had kept burning. Something that refused to be extinguished. And now that flame had become a book that could not be ignored. I wanted to shout. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to run through the house and hold it up high, but instead I pressed it to my chest and closed my eyes. Because this victory was mine alone. He sat in the other room, completely unaware that the woman he had mocked, the woman he had belittled, had just placed her name into the world in a way he could never erase. And I found comfort in the quiet of it. I found peace in knowing that I did not need to prove myself to him. Because the proof was already in my hands, real and undeniable, bound and printed for anyone who cared to see. That night I slipped the book under my pillow before I went to sleep, not out of fear that it would be taken, but because I wanted to rest, knowing that my dream had finally taken form. For the first time in years, I slept soundly. Not as the woman who had been told she had done nothing with her life, but as the woman who had built something lasting. And as I drifted off into that deep sleep, I knew that the world would soon see what I had always carried inside me. And when that moment came, it would speak louder than any insult, louder than any shattered glass. And it would echo far beyond the walls that had once tried to contain me. The weeks that followed felt like I was walking through two different worlds at once. In one world, I was the same woman I had always been in his eyes, preparing meals, folding laundry, answering his harsh remarks with silence. He still looked at me as though I had wasted my years. Still carried himself with the pride of a man who thought he stood taller than everyone else. And yet in the other world, the one I carried secretly within me, I was an author whose name was about to appear on shelves. A woman whose words had traveled beyond these walls. A woman who had broken free without ever raising her voice. And that secret world gave me strength. It gave me dignity. It gave me a peace he could not touch. Sometimes when he would sit across the table grumbling about the day or tossing insults without a second thought, I would simply smile to myself, not a smile of submission, but one of quiet triumph. Because I knew something he didn't. I knew that while he thought my life had amounted to nothing, strangers in places I had never even been would soon be reading my stories, carrying pieces of my heart with them. Finding meaning in the very words he had called worthless. And it was that knowledge that steadied me, that made every cruel remark feel smaller than ever before. I began to notice changes in myself. I stood a little taller, I moved with more calm. And though he tried to bait me into arguments, I no longer rose to them, because I had already won in the silence. I did not need to fight him. I did not need to shout or defend myself. All I needed was patience, because the world was preparing to do the revealing for me. And when it did, no excuse, no denial, no insult would ever erase it. His words would crumble against the truth of what I had created. At night when I was alone, I would take the book from its hiding place and read passages to myself, letting the rhythm of my own words remind me of who I truly was. Not the invisible woman he thought he had broken, but the writer I had always been. And with every page I turned, I felt the years of silence falling away like dust, replaced by the steady light of knowing that I had carved a space for myself in this world, and nothing he said could change that. Nothing at all. As the days passed and the release date of my book drew closer, I found myself reflecting on everything that had led me here. I thought about the years I had spent in silence, the sacrifices I had made, the dreams I had buried, and how easily he had convinced himself that I was nothing more than the shadow of his success. Yet in truth I had been building something all along, brick by brick, word by word, and though he still carried on in the same way, dismissing me, mocking me, believing that I was beneath him, I no longer felt the sting, because I knew what was waiting just beyond his sight. I knew the world was about to see me in a way he never had, and that knowledge was like a quiet armor around my heart. I started to notice the little things that once made me feel small, now made me feel strong. When he laughed at me, I thought of the laughter of strangers who would soon find comfort in my stories. When he rolled his eyes at me, I thought of the editor who had written such kind words about my voice. When he waved his hand as if to dismiss me, I thought of the letter that had promised me not only a book deal but a future, a chance to keep writing, to keep sharing. And with every reminder, I felt taller, steadier, no longer weighed down by his bitterness, because I had stepped out of his shadow and into my own light. At night, I would lie awake and imagine the day he would find out. I pictured him walking into a bookstore and catching sight of my name, his hands reaching for the book with disbelief, his lips parting but no words coming. And in my mind I did not gloat, I did not scream, I simply watched in silence, because I knew the truth did not need my voice to defend it. It would speak for itself. And that thought alone was enough to carry me through the waiting. Enough to make me smile through the very same insults that once broke me. And in those quiet moments of reflection, I realized something even deeper. I realized that my story was not only about revenge or proving him wrong, it was about proving to myself that it was never too late. That even after decades of silence, even after years of being overlooked, a voice could still rise, a dream could still live, and worth could still be found. And that was the lesson I wanted to carry forward. That was the truth I wanted anyone who listened to me to remember. That no matter how many times life tells you that you are nothing, you must keep the fire alive, because one day it will burn bright enough for the whole world to see. The truth is, he still does not know. He still walks through this house believing I am nothing. He still believes his words broke me. But what he cannot see is that I am stronger than I have ever been. My name is already on the pages of a book that will soon sit on shelves. My words are already being prepared to travel farther than he ever imagined I could. And while he carries on with his pride and his arrogance, I carry a secret joy, a quiet triumph that no one can take from me. The same silence he once used to keep me small has now become my greatest strength. Because when he finally learns the truth, it will not be through my voice. It will be through the undeniable proof that I left behind, bound in print and alive in the world, and that moment will speak louder than any glass he ever threw at me. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end. It means more than I can say. Please don't forget to subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. I look forward to sharing more of my stories with you.